In America, people of color are also American citizens. White supremacy will not terrorize us.
At the historic Emmanuel AME Church, it appears Ruth went inside during Wednesday's Bible study and actually sat down with everyone for at least an hour before he opened fire on the group. When all was said and done, 9 people were killed.
I don't have no more tears, honestly. I've cried enough. I've cried enough. I'm here for one reason, for my brother's honor. He was murdered in broad daylight for the world to see. We, as black men, we've seen a lot of stuff as far as murders and people being taken from us, right? Yes, sir. True. But now, not only it's been seen by us and our brothers, but it's been seen by our children now. Yeah. So I'm sitting there watching this, and my daughter, my daughter tells me, Dad, I can't leave you. Because I seen what happened to your friend. And I think you need me. My daughter's 6 years old.
Oh my God.
For my daughter to see that and tell me that I need her at 6, imagine what the pain and the frustration is in my mind right now.
Is handcuffed. He has it on his knee on his neck for over 8 minutes. 2.5 of those minutes was after there was no response from George Floyd. And what you don't see in that particular video, but another video from across the street, was just displayed over other cable networks, was 2 of the 3 other officers were literally kneeling on his leg, the stand where the frustration emanates from. Remember, in 2014, Sage, you had NBA players walking around with "I Can't Breathe" T-shirts, courtesy of Eric Garner, the Staten Island man that was choked to death outside of a grocery store by a police officer who ultimately was acquitted, if I remember correctly. Remember, in 2017, Philando Castile in Minnesota, he was shot 7 times by a police officer sitting in the passenger seat of a car with a 4-year-old child in the backseat and his girlfriend right beside him. He was unarmed, but he had informed the police officer that he had a firearm in the glove compartment or in the car, but hadn't reached for it, informed the police officer that he had it, and the police officer still screamed at him, "Don't reach for it," and then shot him 7 different times. These are the kind of things that African-American athletes who come from destitute and deprived backgrounds, who come from poverty-stricken neighborhoods. These are the people they communicate with. They don't just come from these neighborhoods. We grew up in these neighborhoods, not just athletes, but sports commentators and reporters like myself. We grew up in the streets throughout the United States of America. We come from urban communities throughout the United States, and we're accustomed to seeing this kind of nonsense take place. The police officer was arrested the moment he was fired. If you had enough evidence to fire him, you had enough evidence to arrest him on the spot before those riots took place. They're taking place, whether we agree with it or not, they're taking place because an African-American, a disenfranchised community, is trying to give a voice and give a face and give potency to the fact that we are treated differently, and we are treated sometimes like dogs in the streets. Something has to be said, and it's a damn shame that it's come to this, but nevertheless, as appalling and as egregious as it is, we'd be lying if we said it was a surprise. We're not surprised. We're hurt and we're devastated.
Hispanic Americans say they are fearful after the mass shooting in El Paso. A racist manifesto posted online before the shooting claimed, quote, "This attack is a response to the Hispanic invasion of Texas."
Since the shooting, President Trump used the word invasion to describe migrants, and some critics have linked his language to the manifesto.
Just Latino residents in general are saying that they're linking that kind of language that they hear from President Trump, that kind of negative rhetoric, to these attacks directly. In the case of El Paso, what they're saying is that just a few months ago, there was a white supremacist militia who went to the border, they were armed. They said, we are here to represent President Trump to stop the invasion. That is the same thing that you heard in the manifesto. That is the same type of language that you've been hearing from President Trump. So it's not a coincidence. It's not that they think that there's a perception. To them, it's real. It's their reality.
It's marching orders to them.
Exactly. And not only in San Antonio, I think that's the sentiment all across the nation among the majority of Latinos.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because you're talking very specifically about El Paso and things that were mentioned about El Paso, but how are families across the country responding to this and reacting?
I was able to talk to some of the leading organizations in Arizona and in California, states that have also felt threatened, that had been feeling the raft of white supremacy. In Arizona, an organization called Lucha told me that they feel afraid, but at the same time they feel strong. They are very resilient. They are a very active community who is used to mobilizing their community and going out and getting out the vote, and they feel that that is one way that they're going to be able to counter this. They said that racism has been alive and well for a long time, but that they feel that President Trump and his words have emboldened white supremacists and have increased the amount of hate crimes that they see.
Well,
and in the case of California, it's something very similar, but there was something different about what they told me in California. Chirla, another one of the leading organizations there, and they said that people weren't just afraid and that people didn't just feel threatened, but they felt unprotected. They feel that the agenda that President Trump has against Hispanics, or what they perceive as that, has spread to all of institutions. So they feel that there's no institution that can protect them.
The mass shooting of 6 Asian women at their place of work and 2 other white victims is reverberating around the country. Robert Aaron Long, now in custody and charged with murder and assault, has admitted to the shootings. The rampage yesterday began at around 5 p.m., some 30 miles south of Atlanta at Young's Asian Massage. About an hour later, police responded to shootings at 2 other establishments across from each other in northeast Atlanta. Police say Long was headed for Florida, where he seemed to have planned similar attacks. Even though law enforcement haven't pinned down a racial motive, Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms said the murders raised fears among Asian Americans.
Obviously, whatever the motivation was for this guy, we know that many of the victims, the majority of the victims, were Asian. We also know that this is an issue that's happening across the country. It is unacceptable, it is hateful, and it has to stop.
That condemnation for anti-Asian violence echoed across the country today. On Capitol Hill, the chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, Congresswoman Judy Chu, blamed the surge of attacks on former President Trump and his xenophobic rhetoric during the pandemic.
It just brings home to so many Asian Americans that they are fearful of their lives and circumstances where they would otherwise feel safe in their homes and at their jobs.
The nonprofit group StopAsianHate found hate incidents surged by nearly 150% in 2020, with Asian American women more than twice as likely to be targeted. This as the Anti-Defamation League issued new findings today that white supremacist propaganda is at a decades-long
This
high.
angry exchange took place in New York.
Did you just say, go back to China, bitch? Is that what you said?
You're insulting me!
No, man.
A woman in a taxi is accused of telling an Asian American to go back to China.
Say that again. You said communist China?
Well, isn't that where you're from?
No, it's not.
The real surprise came when the identity of the woman in the taxi cab was revealed. Turns out she's the daughter of the late United States Senator from New York, the legendary Daniel Patrick Moynihan. He's so highly regarded, this new $1.6 billion train station, Moynihan Train Hall, was named after him. Maura Moynihan, a human rights activist, says the incident was a dispute over a cab and denies hurling racist remarks. She also denies the dispute stemmed from anti-Asian sentiment. I've devoted most of my life to working with and for Asian people, she says.
Let's hear how the media play the word game to make Chinese Americans as a foreigner in America.
Now, you'd think the Chinese would appreciate this. It makes their job easier, but they don't appreciate it. In fact, it just increases their contempt for our leaders.
Again, Tucker using the words Chinese instead of China to actually include Chinese Americans who are American citizens in America.
Using Black Lives Matter as a weapon against the United States.
Again, Tucker uses the words Chinese instead of China to make the link between the Chinese American to China.
You have the Chinese lecturing us about human rights. You never thought you'd see the day that happened.
Now, the white privilege is full in display, that white Americans cannot be criticized for their races against people of color. Black Lives Matters.
This angry exchange took place in New York.
Did you just say, go back to China, bitch? Is that what you said?
You are assaulting me.
No, man.
A woman in a taxi is accused of telling an Asian American to go back to China.
Say that again. He's like, communist China?
Well, isn't that where you're from?
No, it's not.
The real surprise came when the identity of the woman in the taxi cab was revealed. Turns out she's the daughter of the late United States Senator from New York, the legendary Daniel Patrick Moynihan. He's so highly regarded, this new $1.6 billion train station, Moynihan Train Hall, was named after him. Maura Moynihan, a human rights activist, says the incident was a dispute over a cab and denies hurling racist remarks. She also denies the dispute stemmed from anti-Asian sentiment. I've devoted most of my life to working with and for Asian people, she said.
On December 7th, 1941, the Empire of Japan launched an attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor. In the following months, hundreds of thousands of Japanese Americans were rounded up and sent to internment camps under suspicion of disloyalty to the United States. But the feelings that paved the road to internment began long before the attack. For more than 80 years, Asian immigrants were viewed as economic threats, spurring various laws that effectively banned them from the country. For those who made it to America, the lingering resentment culminated after Pearl Harbor. Motivated by vocal outcries from politicians and military officials, FDR signed Executive Order 9066, empowering the U.S. Army to designate areas from which any or all persons may be excluded. He later formed the War Relocation Authority to establish 10 permanent camps, housing nearly 120,000 Japanese Americans, mostly from the western United States. 2/3 of those interned were native-born American citizens. With only 6 days to dispose of their possessions, residents were forced to sell their belongings and even their homes for small sums of money. Internment camps were often situated in isolated deserts, prone to harsh weather, and surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. Within the barracks, internees lived in small one-room apartments with little privacy and constant surveillance. They were only given a standard army cot, blankets, and a small heating stove. Despite these difficult living conditions, internees tried to establish a sense of community, creating newspapers, schools, churches, and farms. Even in the face of persecution, young men came forth to join the military. Nearly 33,000 Japanese Americans served during World War II, many of whom became highly decorated for their valor in battle. Yet as the war continued, public opinion worsened against Japanese Americans. Only 35% of the country thought they should be allowed home once the war was over. This sentiment kept the camps open for over 3 years. On December 17, 1944, the government announced that Japanese American evacuees could return to their homes. When they did return, they found their homes looted and their possessions gone. With work almost impossible to come by, many fell homeless and destitute. At the time, the federal government offered no assistance for those attempting to rebuild their lives. It would take over 40 years before President Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, paying reparations to each victim of internment.
No payment can make up for those lost years. So what is most important in this bill has less to do with property than with honor. For here we admit a wrong. Here we reaffirm our commitment as a nation to equal justice under the law.
Let's not have the history repeat itself 80 years later.
I would like to remind you how dominant the like and the subscribe button are. If you click them now, YouTube will show this video to even more people. So if you want to support my message, and if you think more people should listen to my story, then please smash that like button and subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much.